Welcome to Econ 102, where economist Noah Smith and I make sense of what's happening in the news, technology, business, and beyond through the lens of economics. Let's jump right in. How you doing, man?
It could be worse. Could be worse. Yeah, I just went to some conference in Canada on industrial policy. That was kind of fun.
Oh, cool.
I'm just
Well,
always amazed at how much nicer Canadians are than us. They're just like cheerful and laid back and friendly. It's like Americans are just so fucking like serious and intense.
why are Canadians that way?
I don't know, man. It's like I can spin theories, but I asked some Canadian friends. They're like, "Are we?" And they don't even know. They don't even know. It's
Are they
just,
kind of like Midwesterners in that way?
Well, no, I didn't actually find Midwesterners to be like that. I mean, I lived in, my family's from St. Louis, and
Yeah.
then yes, I've been there a bunch, and then I lived in Michigan for a bunch, and then like I didn't find I found Midwesterners to be a little bit standoffish, honestly.
Oh, interesting.
Like we're just a little bit not standoffish necessarily, but just sort of like quiet and placid and sort of like I don't know. It's not like, like, hey, how's it going? Not gregarious, not smiley. I don't know.
What that makes I hear you. What about the conference itself? Any what is sort of the state of industrial policy? Sort of like how are people excited about industrial policy? What is the discourse around industrial policy these days?
Well, Canadians are thinking about it, but they don't know exactly how to think about it because they're a lot of this discourse is borrowed from America. They're just hearing Americans talk about it and they're talking about it, but without realizing that Canada's capabilities and goals and all these things are pretty different. And so they're not quite exactly sure what to do with it. So I was giving them some ideas in my keynote speech of like what they could do with it. And there were some pretty cool people there. There were some Canadian politicians and then some like economists and a lot of the industrial policy sort of thinkers were there. So I think I gave them some things to think about. I talked about how, like for America, you might think about industrial policy as like a defense thing. And you might
Yeah.
think about that in Canada too, but the defense challenges are different. Like in America, you'd think about maybe deterring China or whatever.
Yeah.
But then in Canada, you're not going to do that. Like China is just a billion times bigger than you, and there's no hope of doing that. So, like in Canada, you'd think about being a manufacturing hub to support Europe, in its sort of fight against Russia.
Yeah.
So that's like probably the most you could do defense wise. But the problem is that their defense sector is still thinking about in terms of building like ships. Like, why would you want to build ships in Canada? You're going to start a naval war with who? Like you're going to go sail and take on like the Chinese fleet? No, you're not. Like you don't need a navy, you need drones. And so there was stuff like that. But also, what I realized talking to them, mostly it was about civilian stuff. And I was talking about the electric tech stack, which I've talked about extensively here. And I realized that there's two big facts that about industrial policy that kind of go together. So I think I'm going to write this post very soon. The first is that drones are taking over warfare. And everything you need to make a drone is now everything you need to make a car and an appliance and a robot and a machine tool and a train and a phone. All these things,
Yeah.
like all of manufacturing is converging on these like few things that you have to make. It used to be that there were a whole bunch of trillion specialized things, but those specialized things are getting replaced with some very general purpose things. And so, yeah.
Yeah, explain that a little bit. Did it basically go from like they were manufacturing I don't know, shoes and all sorts of common, and they kind of like moved up the ladder, like to phones, and then to drones, and then to cars, and then to I don't know robots or like.
I mean that's real. That's a real thing that happened, but this isn't about that. So this is more about how a lot of the sort of advanced products in the economy from phones, cars, drones, robots, etc., are no longer these hyper specialized things. So go back just a few years and to make like a factory robot, there's robots arms putting cars together. Those have been there since like the 70s and 80s. Those robots and those things to make them. It was very specialized parts, these mechanical actuators that you'd make, or these like, or the little sensors that you'd make for these things were very specialized. Okay, but now you can kind of do a lot of these things in with just a few kind of off the shelf components. Like so what you need for those robots, of course, you'll still need to make like the physical thing that's still specialized, right? But then but that was never the hardest part, like just the injection molding and the like tooling and whatever of like the making the physical part. But like the electronic parts, So to make it go, like how do you make it go? Well, now what you have is like a big battery in there typically, if it's something that moves around, or you can plug it in if it's not. But basically, that's going to be similar for everything. There's only a few like types of battery cells, for everything you can make. And then how does it know what to do? Well, there's just a few computer chips and they just define everything. How does it communicate? Well, now you'll use like a software defined radio. You'll use a computer chip that acts like a radio, that'll just communicate with everything else. And so, and then you'll have like some power electronics and like an electric motor. And you don't, when you're using combustion for stuff, then you have like very specialized parts, because to make a controlled explosion and turn that explosion into energy at different sizes and powers and things like that requires all different kinds of gears and surfaces and like all these kind of, parts, and very, very specialized. Right. And so that's why countries like Germany, that could make all the specialized parts, really prospered a lot in the 20th century. And, but now, you can do a lot more things with just like the same magnet you basically use for everything, or like the same, you basically have like to get energy out of a battery, you just have like some metal pieces. It's pretty simple stuff, right? Yeah. So it's just, you make a battery, you make the motors, you make the chips and stuff, and then you're done. You're kind of done, except for like the physical pieces that will be different, because that's just different injection molds, different, metal pieces, different dies, casting and stuff like that. So those are different, but those aren't really hard. Yeah. And so all the stuff that used to be hard and specialized, which was like the shape of the pieces in the engines, basically, like that was the hard stuff, was getting mechanical energy out, was this complicated, complex dance. And now you're just getting electrical energy out, and that's easy. And so for that reason, a lot of stuff is converging on the same few components, which is why you have BYD, which makes, electric cars. They could also make drones. They could also make trains. They could also make, every kind of electronics known to man, including phones, laptops, TVs, whatever you need, anything you need, right? Video cameras, I don't know, but like, and they can make all this stuff. There's still some specialized components. There's some like chemistry for various things, and like those are mostly like Japanese, but there's specialized chemistry. But so much of the manufacturing is converging on just a few things that you have this thing called the electric tech stack, which is basically this suite of just a few basic things that can make you, up to, in the future, maybe like 80% of manufactured goods will just be some variant of this electric tech stack. And Elon Musk understands this, and BYD understands this, and China, I think, as a whole understands this. And yeah. And then I think most American companies and most American politicians and commentators do not yet understand this. So people like Packy McCormick and Ryan McIntosh and I are trying to make people understand this.
Yeah. And is it fair to say, as a great overview, is it fair to say that there's no way we can sort of, in terms of how we respond to it, in terms of how America responds to it, is there no way to sort of bring back the old jobs, but there is a potential, old manufacturing jobs, but there is a potential path to sort of bring back in a kind of advanced manufacturing, or?
Well, here's the thing. So like, suppose you're talking about batteries, right? So if you're talking about like working on an assembly line, making like engine parts, we've automated a lot of that, but there's still room for some people on there. Batteries, it's just like you dump a vat of shit in a vat of shit, and then like it, a little machine wraps it into a thing, and then you're done. It's just optimizing that process. So we have need for like lots of engineers. So sort of like the, kind of the middle skilled class of people who like, you went to like SMU and got an engineering degree, right? That's a very solid middle class thing. Or you went to like, let's say Chico State. Okay. Yep. Or where would that be in Michigan? Like Wayne State? I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you went to Wayne State. You get an engineering degree. You go 4 years. You get an engineering degree. You go to work for something. And you spend your career figuring out how to like make this thing more efficiently, dump a vat of thing and another vat of thing, and then you optimize that, right? And then that kind of middle skilled engineering work, we have lots of jobs for that. But the sort of like you're a human robot using your fingies to snap things together, like that's going out. That's just going away, those jobs. And even the jobs where like you pick up a heavy thing and you move it, that's going away. Although humans still do a lot of that, but like it's getting less and less. And it's like, that's not a growth industry, right? There'll still be some of those jobs for sure, but it's not a growth industry where like those are the jobs of the future. Okay. Even if we bring back manufacturing, it's going to be mostly robots. Manufacturing is not a jobs program. It just can't be. Like there, unless you just make fake, make work jobs where you're inefficiently manufacturing things using like a 50-year-old process, like manufacturing 1/10 of what you could be manufacturing just to like artificially provide people with a fake ass job. You can do that, but it makes your country poorer and stupider. Instead, what we need, the reason we need manufacturing is A, defense, but also to export stuff, as China does now. You export stuff, you get money coming in, and then that money gets spread around locally. And so that's what you really need. And if you're a small country like Canada, you need that even more than the United States. The United States can do a lot more with domestic economy stuff, but like Canada, they really need to export stuff. And because they're small, they don't have a lot of internal market. And what internal market they do have is spread out in this thin ribbon along the northern border of America. And so really, we need to, they need to export. And, a lot of smaller countries need to do that. And to do that, it helps to be able to manufacture stuff, because manufacturing stuff is easier to export than you can export software. You can export business services, call center services, you can export OnlyFans, but although we shouldn't morally, but we could, and we do. And so you can export all that stuff, but manufacturing is so easy to export because you just put it in one of those shipping containers and then you just ship it. Yeah. Right. Whereas with services, you've got to get people plugged into your ecosystem, and you got to get all the guys in Bangladesh signed up to OnlyFans. I'm really glad cancel culture is over. I'd be canceled for so many things.
We'll continue our interview in a moment after a word from our sponsors. What does the future hold for business? Ask 9 experts and you'll get 10 answers. It's a bull market. It's a bear market. Rates will rise or fall. Can someone invent a crystal ball? Until then, over 43,000 businesses have future-proofed their business with NetSuite by Oracle, the #1 AI cloud ERP, bringing accounting, financial management, inventory, and HR into one fluid platform with one unified business management suite. There's one source of truth, giving you the visibility and control you need to make quick decisions with real-time insights and forecasting. You're peering into the future with actionable data. When you're closing the books in days, not weeks, you're spending less time looking backwards and more time on what's next. So if I had needed this product, it's what I'd use. Whether your company is earning millions or even hundreds of millions, NetSuite helps you respond to your immediate challenges and seize your biggest opportunities. Speaking of opportunities, download the CFO's Guide to AI and Machine Learning for free at netsuite.com/102. The guide is free to you at netsuite.com/102. netsuite.com/102.
So a world in which the U.S. sort of has a manufacturing boom, what's most likely to have happened there for that to happen?
So United States has a manufacturing boom. Well, first we need a government that really cares about doing that. I don't necessarily think we have that right now, but we could, and maybe we'll put Aaron Slodov in charge of the government, right, or somebody like that. Who would be a good manufacturing fanatic to put? Julius Crane, I don't know. Who would be your top pick for manufacturing fanatic?
Ryan on the American Dynamism team.
Yes, Ryan. All right, so we make Ryan Emperor of America. Ryan continues to run America without shoes in like a Hawaiian shirt just from his living room. And then we do this. What could we do? Well, we need to get really serious about land use. Just absolutely bulldoze all the barriers we built to land use. We can keep environmental regulations, but then have them be boxes checked by a bureaucrat instead of lawsuits, right? And so we do that, and we just make land use a lot easier, and we make things like electric transmission a lot easier, things like that, which Texas has done. In Texas, it's no problem to get connected to the grid. So you do that, and then you basically just do a bunch of Texas stuff, and then do that for housing too. And then we pick some clusters and we say, this place will be our new Shenzhen. Okay, south of Austin. I like south of Austin being our new Shenzhen. And then we start with a core suite of technologies that we can promote. And I think the electric tech stack is the best place to start because it's so cohesive and it's so important for national defense too. Because drones use a drone. Everything you need to make a drone is everything you need to make everything else. And so it's really the drone stack. And so you start with drones, you have Drone City anchored by government demand. And then you make sure with industrial policy that you have the upstream components of that, right? You don't, so you can use, for drones, we can place orders with national defense, and we can also change the regulatory laws so that you can fly over the horizon drones, fly drones really easily, and turn Texas into drone city. I love this for Texas. College Station, my hometown, should be drone city. And so you do that, and then you use industrial policy to promote some of the sort of low profitability, high volume upstream stuff, like rare earths. We want permanent magnets, right? We want the rare earths for power electronics. We want and batteries. Basically rare earth stuff and batteries are like the upstream things. It's like for steel, right? You'd promote the upstream industry of that would be like coking coal and iron ore. Yeah. And so you had countries that wanted to become number one in steel, like Korea, right? They would really, they were like, okay, well, we realize no one really wants to go into the coking coal and iron ore business because that's a shit business, low margins, dirty, and so instead we're just going to subsidize that. But then when you subsidize the upstream things, the downstream things get cheap. And so let's subsidize lots of like cheap, batteries and rare earth magnets and transistors and stuff. So that downstream we can have stuff that makes a profit. Yep. Stuff where you assemble those things into something a little complicated. Okay. And then, and we don't necessarily want to have tariffs on those things either. Maybe China, because we don't want them to cut us off with export controls, right? It's rare earth stuff. We can import rare earths from Japan, no problem. Right. And Japan's figured out how to partially get around, at least in large part, get around China's rare earth export controls.
Yep.
So we learn from them. So we do that. We designate South Austin to be our new Shenzhen. And then we just use industrial policy to promote the upstream things, anchor the downstream demand with military stuff, and then like promote, do our old basic innovation policy, which we know how to do that. We did this for like computers and semiconductors. We've done that a million times. And then what we haven't done is fix land use, and we haven't promoted upstream industries since like the early Cold War, when we needed to build a bunch of like aluminum, we'd promote that kind of stuff, right? But like when we needed to build a bunch of aluminum like planes and things, but like we haven't done that for a long time, so we need to rediscover how to do that. And then the military stuff we haven't done since like the 90s, I guess. And so we need to rediscover how to do all those things, but it's stuff we've done before. It's like, there's no magic secret sauce here. And then don't do what China does, which is just like throw massive subsidies at like industries to just like overproduce. Okay, subsidize the upstream things. And then you might want to promote exports though. Like export promotion is really important. So I think the test of whether or not you're productive and good is whether you can sell in the world market. We should be able to beat the Chinese, even though they throw such massive subsidies at it that they'll have lower cost, and they already have the supply chain established in country. So they'll be able to beat us on cost. We can beat them on quality, like frequent servicing, reliability, and like transparency. We can beat them on a lot of things.
And what's the best way to promote exports?
Well, that's a great question. So first of all, we have to just ignore the WTO thing that says don't pay people to export things, and just say, guess what? We're paying you to export things. You give loans, cheap loans, conditional on export. That's the thing. Cheap bank loans for people who export.
Yeah, got it.
Okay, and do that. That probably WTO compliant. I don't actually know the law on here. I know that paying checks to like writing checks to people who export is illegal under WTO. I'm not sure we should even follow that, but I'm also not sure that writing checks to exporters is the right way. I think bank loans, cheap ass bank loans, hey, you want to export? We'll lend you infinite money. And of course, some of that, there will be a bust, right? Because industries are cyclical, and you'll pile on too much debt and you'll have a bust, but then we'll build up some really great industries before that bust happens.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Same is true of AI, by the way. AI is going to have a bust too.
What makes you say that? There's just too much CapEx going into it, or?
Yeah. I mean, like all that CapEx, like all those data centers will be used to their full extent, right? They're not building too much stuff, but the thing is that finance can always outrun physical things. Because finance is digital, it's just a check. So like, I can write a bigger number on a check faster than you can build me 10,000 data centers, right? And so what's happening is that the cost of capital is now actually too high in the AI space. That's a weird way to put it. That's a finance professor way to put it. What that means is that companies are borrowing too much money at too high rates. All the stuff they're building is useful and will pay off. It just won't pay off fast enough to pay off some of the interest rates they're borrowing at, probably.
Yep.
And that means, and they're just writing too many loans at too many high interest rates, and they won't be able to pay it back that fast. I think that's why you get like the Gartner hype cycle, right? This like euphoria and then disillusionment, because like the euphoria is finance, right? Everybody sees that like Web 1.0 is going to take over the world, and they're right, it did. Like e-commerce rules everything now.
Yep.
E-commerce and online ads are just huge business, and subscription models are just gigantic businesses.
Yep.
And yet people financed it too fast in 1998 and 9, right?
Yeah.
They financed it too fast, and they had a bust, even though like any company that survived, like if Webvan and Pets.com had survived that bust, they would be making money hand over fist in the 2010s. They'd be dominating markets, but they couldn't survive because they financed themselves too much. It was a financing crash, not a real crash. And that's what these crashes all kind of are. And so I don't think we have to worry too much about that. We just have to know that it's coming. Like, look at railroads. Any railroad, like in 1873, we had this giant crash, right? It caused a 10-year long recession or something like that, because we didn't know how to handle recessions at the time, and our economies are much more fragile. But we had this giant railroad boom that was like 6% of GDP. I think we spent on building railroads every year. That's huge.
Yeah.
That's like 5 times the size of the telecom boom at its peak. And so we were spending 6% of GDP a year on these railroads, and then every single one of the railroads we built ended up getting used to the max, and a lot still used today. But we still had this crash because they loaned money to the railroad companies faster than the railroad companies could actually create demand for the railroad product.
Yeah.
And then they crashed, and then after the crash, that all the stuff got used in the end. And then the later building boom dwarfed the earlier building boom. Right now, we've built, house prices are well above where they were in 2008. Right? We've built this ton of houses. Like, you can say there wasn't actually no bubble because it came back. The market came back. Well, it came back. The point of the bubble is the temporary thing. The crash is temporary. The bubble's temporary and the crash is temporary. You can think of it as kind of this fluctuation at the beginning of a cycle, beginning of an industry, right?
Yeah. Beginning
of .com, beginning of like the structured housing finance market, which, by the way, a lot of the structured finance stuff that blew up the economy in 2008, we still have. We still have all that stuff. And all those houses we built someone's living in them. Right. And so like, it wasn't necessarily waste. It was just overfinancing. We wrote checks too fast. And I think that's what people don't understand about these bubbles. They think it's actually building all this wasteful stuff, when in fact, it's actually just overfinancing the non-wasteful stuff.
And so if we financial engineer our way into these problems, can we financially engineer our way out of them or something? Like, is just inevitable?
No, we just have to accept that at some point there will be a crash. Euphoria will happen. There will be a crash. And after that crash, we will rebuild. We will end up using all the stuff. So like, basically the short answer to that is when data centers crash here, I don't know that that's going to happen. Nobody knows, right? There have been CapEx booms that didn't crash, like the 5G, right? We built out 5G. We spent a decent amount of CapEx on that, and it never crashed.
Okay, let me zoom out a bit, because I want to segue this to, you did a great book review and conversation with Dan Wang about his book Breakneck. He's got this sort of observation that you've observed in the past too, about sort of to be glib, and America's political class is lawyers, and China is more engineering based. And one observation you make or question you have is, hey, is this a result of just deep cultural differences, or is this really just the evolution of a country to some degree? And was America, 100 years ago or 75 years ago, more engineering focused ourselves? And if so, is this something that could happen to China too, as it matures? Why don't you edit that characterization and maybe flesh out kind of what the book made you think?
Yeah. So I think what Dan really captures well is that America has become a country focused on dividing the spoils, on dividing the pie, on redistribution. And lawyers are the masters of redistribution. They decide who gets what. And whereas China is the country oriented on growing the pie. And engineers are the masters of growing the pie. They decide, let's get more. And they don't think as carefully about who gets what. And so really, I think Dan really highlights some institutional cultural differences between the United States and China. But what I think he may not totally, like, there may be a lot more commonality than he sees, and it's just stage of development. It's just that when America was coming up and building all these railroads and building all these cities and stuff like that, building all these industries from scratch, we had, we may not have had engineers dominate the government, but it didn't matter because the government mostly stood out of the way, right? And the people who said that, what Dan is actually seeing is it really just communism, there's a certain grain of truth to that, I think, because in China, they central plan things. In China, like in America, we had the government step back and say, hey, you want to build a car industry? You want to build a railroad industry? Go crazy, my guy, just do it, Whereas in China, they're like, hey, you want to build a railroad industry? You want to build a car industry? The government will help you do this and be there, part of the process every step of the way. Communism versus capitalism. And so when you have an engineering culture in capitalism, the engineers don't go into the government because the government's irrelevant. Okay. We did have actually at one point we decided we were going to start doing a bunch of industrial policy. And then we had we elected a guy called the Great Engineer who was a famous engineer who was supposed to turn America into a country of from laissez-faire capitalism into deliberate industrial policy to promote new industries. And then his problem was that he ran into macroeconomic difficulties and he didn't understand the deficiency of demand. So he just, he didn't understand that. And so his name was not Xi Jinping. His name was Herbert Hoover. And he was the great engineer. And so he was the guy who was supposed to turn us from laissez-faire to industrial policy. And then it did not fit the demand shortage we had. And then it turned out that Franklin Delano Roosevelt, this lawyerly, effete liberal guy, was the actual guy who turned America into this engineering state, in World War II. Right. And hired all these engineers to run the government during World War II. And Freedom's Forge has some stuff about that. Yeah. And so basically, Xi Jinping he's a Herbert Hoover that you can't kick out. Right. China could kick Xi Jinping out and bring in a guy who would fight the deficiency of demand with massive stimulus and start a world war that would pull China out of its slump. And then, maybe reform Chinese society in ways that made it more inclusive, like FDR did to us. You could do all those things. You could fix all of China's problems at once at the expense of kicking everyone's ass in the world, which we did in America in the 40s and the 30s and 40s. And they're not going to do it because guess what? Xi Jinping is really good at infighting and he's dictator for life. He's going to be there he's like what, 72? Bro is going to be there for 15 more years. Which is exactly China's peak. The dude is going to rule through all of China's peak. He is imagine Herbert Hoover in power through the Depression of World War II. How would we have done? And so maybe all I have to say is ha ha. I don't know. You reap what you sow. It's you've got a dictatorial system, and then oops, you can't kick out Herbert Hoover.
Yeah,
I don't know.
This relates to another post you wrote about, which is this idea that, hey, it seems like the conflict is somewhat on pause between U.S. and China. They're both focused on sort of internal affairs, distracted with internal affairs, maybe U.S. on the culture front and China on the economic front. Why don't you flesh this out?
So I think that China is experiencing several things. Number one, China's giant industrial policy push after the pandemic, China's industrial policy push before the pandemic, had some successes and some failures. I think it had a startlingly made in China 2025 had some successes, and it had a startlingly large number of failures. They failed to really advance their semiconductor or aircraft industry much, or robotics. Actually, robotics industry only got advanced after the pandemic once they started, things started getting more homogenized and they could leverage the electric tech stack more. But then after the pandemic, their idea was, okay, we're going to pick this large list of advanced manufacturing industries, and we're going to lend them infinite money, and we're going to pay them infinite subsidies to produce. And that has now, it succeeded in the sense of raising China's share of global manufacturing. It succeeded in the narrow sense of making people produce. If you pay people to produce things, things will be produced, especially in China. But it failed at most other things. And so it didn't. So it didn't really plug the demand gap from the real estate bubble, because people were producing all this stuff, but people weren't really buying it. They made all these cars, they made all these like, I don't know, humanoid robots. Like, who in China is buying a humanoid robot? Like, you look and you see China building these like oceans and oceans of humanoid robots. It looks like that movie I, Robot. Who's buying it? Nobody's buying a humanoid robot in China. Like, there'll be 5 people who have it as like a toy. Like, humanoid robots are a little too far out from their cycle. I mean, you know that, right? Like, wouldn't you agree?
Yep.
Like, they're not ready for everybody to have a humanoid robot in your home. It's not useful yet. But they're building them. They're building them, and they're counting that in GDP. But then it's not necessarily in final demand, right? Because nobody's buying these things, and so people are still poor, right? Wages are getting paid, but those wages are getting paid out of like taxes and shit.
Yeah.
And then like banks lent, but banks are not going to get paid back. And what you had is this thing called involution, or nejuan. And it's interesting, that's a Chinese word. It's interesting that when Japan went a little of the ways down this road and then pulled back in the 70s and 80s, they had a term for this called, actually late 60s to like mid 70s, I guess. That was when they went down this road. And they did the thing of like, let's just pay everybody to make more stuff. That'll work. And then they quickly coined a term called kato kyoso, which means excessive competition. And if China's industrial policy people and Chinese and Communist Party people, CCP guys, had read MIDI's internal reports from the 70s, they would have known about kato kyoso, and then they would have been like, oh, that's nejuan, fuck. But instead, they unleashed a combination of loans, tax incentives, and subsidies, utterly unprecedented. Like, Japan was maybe spending like 0.5% of GDP on that stuff. Mm-hmm. China's spending like 4% of GDP on this stuff, man. And like every province has a car company. Every province has a solar panel company or 10. Every province has a steel company. Every province has like a trailing edge chip factory. Every province has like, electronics factory. Every province has battery factories. Every province has everything. Okay. And they're competing with each other. And of course, we see it from the perspective of outsiders. We see this flood of exports, right? Second China shock, China flooding the world with exports. But most of that stuff is not for export. Like, you can't actually export that much of your GDP when you're that big. You have to sell to yourself. We keep thinking that like every country's Korea, every country's like a little like chicken McNugget of a country that can just like, the rest of the world is just infinite demand for our stuff, right? And Canada, maybe, yeah, you're a small country, 40 million people, you're just tiny. But then but China with 1.4 billion people, all right, that's like 35 times the size of Canada or Korea or something. You got to sell to the domestic market. And when you have people just dumping infinite product into the domestic market, guess what happens? Profits go away. Americans, especially in the software industry, I think, have a hard time comprehending that fact. Like, because we're so used to this 2010 software industry world of like winner take all, which is like, if you spend enough, you just blitz scale, you get a bunch of VC money, you do a bunch of CapEx, you spend enough, you become Airbnb, and then you win the market. Sorry, VRBO, you suck. You're out. Airbnb, every network effect, so you win. Winner take all market. But like, cars are not that, and never have been. There's never been like one car company that everyone buys their cars. Henry Ford thought there would be, and he was wrong. And so there's never, you don't win the car industry. You win a piece of the car industry. You don't win. And then in the solar industry, you can't win the solar. You're never going to make profit, man. You're an upstream thing. And so the more you subsidize, the more just like all those subsidies just go into like price cuts, which is great for the world because they're exporting a bunch of solar panels around the world. But like, it's, great for climate change, but not so good for the profits of Chinese companies. And then so you pay people to do this overproduction. Then you're like, hold up. These loans are never going to get paid back. So banks are like, I'm going to stop loaning to these people. So if you see loan growth in China has crashed to industrial companies. It's still growing. It's growing, but it's not. It was growing at like 40% a year. It was just nuts. It was just now it's growing at maybe 8% a year, something like that. It's really, really been reduced, and then even that's going to be unsustainable. They are going to have to soon cut that to zero, I think. And so you just not or even negative. They're going to have to like actually pull back on lending on net. And so because this stuff's not getting paid back, man.
Yep.
No one wants that sea of rusting metal. Anyway.
Yeah. You introduced this term that I hadn't heard before. You call it involution.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's all over the Chinese press. Like that's all anyone can talk about.
And is
And
that
it
the
just
phenomenon you're
means,
describing?
sorry?
Is that the phenomenon you're describing?
It is. It is. And so it's where everyone works incredibly hard. Everyone invests a hell of a lot. Everyone's doing 996 work style. Everyone's, just like capex, 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 boom, crazy boom. And then like, and stuff's getting built, but at the same time, profit goes away because you compete prices down below cost and profit goes away. I think we may see this in the AI industry in America. We may see Nejuan in the AI industry. If all the frontier models are basically interchangeable, then we could see all the people paying so much to train and run their frontier models, like get their profits competed away. Like what if OpenAI and Anthropic and Grok and whatever XAI can never, what if they never are able to charge a premium because the other guys are almost as good? And as soon as you start trying to charge like, $2,000 a month, $3,000 a month for this chatbots to people, then like people are just like, no, I'm going to use a thing that's 95% as good because quality doesn't matter that much at the top, right? And in a year, these guys will have caught up, the laggards will have caught up anyway, right? The lagging companies. And yeah, and so I think it could happen in the AI industry here, this over competition, but it's definitely happening in China. You get this when you have an industry for which physical capital is the main kind of capital that you build.
Yeah.
When like social mobile companies were doing all this stuff in the 2010s, the main factors of production were network capital and network effects and human capital, right? So network effect is like you're the first Twitter, so now you're the main Twitter, right? Some other person could have built that a week earlier, and then Jack Dorsey, nobody would know who that guy is, right? Network effects, first mover advantages get locked in. The second thing was human capital. You had a finite supply of really cracked engineers, the 10x engineers, if you will, and they all lived in San Francisco, and you had to go to San Francisco and you get them. And if you could offer enough money to hoover up all these engineers, then nobody else would get the 10x engineers, and you'd outcompete everybody, and you're like Google or whatever, right?
Yep.
Just a few companies. And so, so that was the economy of software in the 2010s, just these incredible winner-take-all effects. And when you have physical capital governing things, when how much you can make depends on how many robots you buy or how many machine tools you buy and how many buildings you buy and how many, whatever robots you buy for your factories, when that's the main constraint is physical capital, how much you can invest, then you can have over competition because instead of one company just making all the profits, you can have no companies make all the profits. You can have just write checks to everybody to just like compete and make more until the price just crashes and nobody can make any money. That's what's going on in China.
Well, let's segue into our own internal affairs. Well, first off, this is the first time we're chatting since sort of Charlie Kirk.
Right.
What are you watching in terms of how things are going to play out for the next few months? One trend, it seems, is anyone who's in power or has even cultural power as a moment is using it to silence others, and anyone who's getting silenced is sort of calling for free speech. But when they have it, they they have the power. They seem to want to silence the others, and so TBD if this escalates in terms of bringing back cancel culture to sort of 2010 levels, and then also sort of a question as to will the political violence be contained, or is there going to be like an increase in these kinds of episodes? And then there's just broader, like, does it spark a conversation on public safety that is productive in any kind of way?
Right.
Yeah, what are your reactions to this, or what are kind of things you're thinking about?
Right. Well, so first of all, I think that it is clear that the shooter, the assassin who killed Charlie Kirk, I forgot the guy's name right now. Taylor Robinson, maybe?
Yeah.
Tyler?
Yep.
Tyler or Taylor? I don't remember.
I think it's Tyler. Let me see.
Tyler Robinson. That dude, he was just some young kid who he got
Robinson.
radicalized by online bullshit. And he turned out to be kind of like a leftist guy, sort of, but he wasn't like deep into like the leftist stuff. It wasn't like he wasn't like, leftist shit poster who's deep in the weeds on politics. He saw, he knew how to use a gun, and he saw some stuff saying like Charlie Kirk is hateful, and heard some stuff from people. It was very casual, easy radicalization. And then he just thought, I'm going to go out and just kill this guy. It wasn't like there's no coordinated movement. It wasn't very hard to radicalize that guy, and it wasn't very hard to turn him into a killer.
Yeah.
It took only a little bit of memes, just a sprinkling of memes to turn him into an effective assassin. And I think that we saw that in Japan with Shinzo Abe's assassination, with a guy who was mad because Shinzo Abe's party had taken money from a cult that ruined the life of this guy's mom. And so he decided to kill Shinzo Abe. And he did it with a homemade 3D printed gun. He didn't know how to use guns, but he was smart. He did 3D printing. And then he just blasted him at point blank range because Japanese security measures are not very good. And so that was an assassination of a guy who, he wasn't part of like some organized movement like the assassins of like the 60s. Like there was in the 60s, you'd see like, a right-wing guy kill a left-wing politician because there were these wings, right? It was like, you could really say like the right is attacking the left is attacking the right. Nowadays, it's like some memes waft in your general direction. You happen to know how to use a gun. You think, I'm bored. Nobody likes me. Like, I have nothing to do. I'm just some stupid ass 22-year-old. I'm going to go out and kill some relatively famous guy.
Yeah. I'm
not going to do public events, man. Like, I'm much lower down the totem pole than Charlie Kirk was, but like, I'm not going to do a series of public debates now. Like, and so it exerts a real chilling effect on public speech and gatherings in America that you have all these like sort of radicalized people running around. And it's hard to tell that they're radicalized. Like if you had the FBI, if you had a more competent FBI actually try to track down radicalization in like the 2000s, you could track Islamic radicalization really easy. It was very easy to see, right? Probably still is today because it's ideological. You just trace the spread of those ideological networks. But this guy who just saw like some meme saying Charlie Kirk is hateful, and then like, because he doesn't like trans people or whatever the hell radicalized this guy. How everybody sees those memes, everybody, and then he was into furry porn or something like that. Like probably all the Zoomers are into furry porn. I don't know, they're weird, and so like they're probably all into furry porn. And so like, how do you track this? How do you know who is the different? Like all these people are sitting around saying, I'm going to kill such and such. I'm going to kill such and such. Like people sit around all day saying this. And, right wingers immediately tracked down a bunch of left wingers who had said, I'm going to kill Charlie Kirk. None of them did. They were just bullshitting online because now everyone bullshits online and online is bullshit. So what do you do? How do you police this? The techniques, the counterterrorism techniques we unveiled, we discovered that were effective in the 2000s in the war on terror are not effective against this kind of like random radicalization because they're not even that ideological. The people who tried to assassinate Trump were just nutters. They were just nutcases. Of course, one thing we can do is just calm down the nation so that people don't think political assassination is a thing. Have you ever seen the movie Taxi Driver?
No, but I feel like it's pretty famous. I feel like I should know it. Or I should have seen it.
It's pretty famous. It's about this guy who's just like kind of mad. He's like an incel.
Yep.
He's a taxi driver who's like an incel. He can't get laid because he's not good with women. And then he hires like a teen hooker, and then like it's mad at the teen hooker for being a hooker, and that teen hooker is played by Jodie Foster, and that becomes important later on. But anyway, then he just gets mad. He just gets kind of messed up, and then he goes and at the end he tries to kill some politician, just to like do something. He has nothing to do. He's not an ideologue. He doesn't even think the politician stopped him from getting laid. He does it to prove his love to this girl who turned him down.
Wow.
And then this movie inspired a real attempted assassination of Ronald Reagan. Because this guy named John Hinckley, who just got out of jail like the other day, actually, John Hinckley in the 1980s decided that he was going to copy the guy from Taxi Driver and kill the president to prove his love for Jodie Foster, the teen hooker from Taxi Driver, who, by the way, is gay. But anyway, he didn't know that. So the guy John Hinckley wants to prove his love for Jodie Foster. And so he gets a gun and he shoots Ronald Reagan in the chest. and Ronald Reagan lives. And because of that, we implement our only serious federal gun control law, the Brady Bill, that we've ever done.
Yeah.
Named after James Brady, a Secret Service guy who took a bullet in that assassination attempt. That was a similar time to now. We are in the like 70s, we're going into like the late 70s, early 80s part now, right? Like I think we're in like 1977-ish.
Yeah.
And at this point in our cycle of unrest, I think. And so you had all these crazy motherfuckers. You had like the Symbionese Liberation Army and all these cults and like Ray Lavoisier blowing up stuff. Have you read Days of Rage?
No.
Mark made me read Days of Rage, so you should read Days of Rage.
Yeah, he talks about
now that you work for Mark.
Yeah.
And so basically now you should have to read all the books that Mark made me read. And so you got all these terrorists, these crazy guys this group move that the Philadelphia Police Department like dropped a bomb on to get rid of them. They were like this insanely violent, like mostly black militant group. Symbionese Liberation Army, sort of the white equivalent of them, who kidnapped this heiress and then killed all these cops and all this crazy shit. And then they got killed in a shootout with cops. And then you had all the other crazy terrorists, leftist terrorists and stuff like that. And then meanwhile, most people were just like, politics, I can't be bothered.
Wow.
And that's kind of like now. You had crazy people running around. In 1976, 2 people tried to assassinate Gerald Ford within the space of a month. One of them got off shots that narrowly missed Ford at a close range. The other, their gun jammed. Both of them were ideologically incoherent. Does this remind you of anything? That was exactly what happened to Trump. 2 crazy ideologically incoherent people try to assassinate Trump. The first one narrowly misses. The second one gun jammed.
Insane.
Or couldn't figure out how to fire the gun. I think they had the safety on or something. Anyway, point being, the exact same thing happened, and they were both ideologically incoherent. And I think, yes, this guy was some sort of leftist who killed Charlie Kirk, but I think he was, it was more just like random memes wafting in his general direction. I don't know how to deal with that. I don't know how we dealt with in the 70s and 80s. We eventually had a gun control law in like the 90s, but by then the era of like random assassinations was way over. But we had this era of assassinations, and I hope we're not going back toward that. I would like that not to happen to me. But anyway.
Do you feel like sort of, in the same way that political parties, the primary sort of, the way that it's structured, you sort of, both parties sort of go more towards both extremes until they get to the general. Is it possible that having different social media networks, X, Blue Sky, etc. You wrote a little bit about the blue skyification. Uh-huh. Like, is that exhibiting a similar effect where people are appealing to the extremes at both bases, or like, are we just having a ratcheting effect on both sides?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think like the politically engaged people are going nuts. Like politically engaged people, like, this is war, that's like screaming, this is war. And then like the non-politically engaged people are just like, Charlie Kirk, oh, he was a good guy. I'm sorry he died. Now please lower my inflation. That's like your average person is just like, fucking politics. They don't want to, like, the right-wing cancellation is a much thinner, like left-wing cancellation. It was like everybody trying to cancel their neighbors. It was like the fucking Cultural Revolution, back then, except without people getting like eaten alive and sent down to the farms. But also I think it reflects the national mood. Like, regular people are not canceling each other anymore on Facebook or Instagram. Like, it just doesn't happen. It's gone. That culture is over. People have replaced it with like TikTok and, just like people still bitch about politics on TikTok, but like, I don't know, K-pop and like, shitty dating culture or whatever, dating discourse or like whatever. You can tell that most of the people in the country have calmed down, but the people at the top are like, this is war, the left, civil war. And like, I think we just need to wait a while until that fraction of people who are screeching about war evaporates from 10% of the country to 2% of the country. And then we'll be back to where we were in the mid 80s when people just really stopped caring and really were just like, okay, dude, punk rock, Star Wars, just like what I care about is like my life. And I'm just going to like go to the gym and work out and do a bunch of cocaine and have a bunch of unprotected sex. Cause it was the 80s and then there was AIDS. But anyway, that was basically what happened. And so then, like, I think we just have to go through that same cycle. And I think you just have to wait for the country to calm down from 10% angry to like 2% angry. And then those 2% won't be big enough to wreck the nation. But 10% is big enough.
Yeah.
That's all I got. That's what I got, you know, like from reading all those books about the 70s and 80s and 60s.
Yeah. And your part of your analysis of the blue skyfication piece is that it's also like a way to get status in like a mature status market. Maybe people are a bit more desperate to rise up. And this has been a way over the last 15, last 10 years plus years. And then there's just a question of, is that still going to be effective? Is it losing its power? But I thought that was an interesting sort of, social.
I think a lot of the power of cancel culture came from companies. Yeah. Companies being scared that they were going to lose business over someone online getting mad at them. And then it slowly dawned on them that unless the people in power get mad at them, unless some very organized, powerful people get mad at them, they won't actually lose any money. So like Budweiser, they lost money. Yeah. So like they realized that right-wing cancel campaigns that are like can actually do organized boycotts could lose you money, but like a bunch of like woke teenagers like yelling that you're racist for a day on Twitter, you won't lose money. And then who cares? And then that filters down to every segment of American society. So right now, if you're running a science fiction convention, and it was 2018, okay, you're running science fiction convention in 2018, and then someone yells, like, all the organizers of this convention are racist because there weren't enough spots given to BIPOC, whatever bullshit, right? Not enough to trans BIPOC people. And so then you're like, oh my God, there's people mad at me online. Oh my God, everyone hates us. They're going to boycott us. We'll be over. The fans have spoken, when really it's just like 2% of the fans who just like are mad, or just are mad that their own shitty science fiction novel didn't get popular, right? And so then they launched this attack on the convention organizers and working the refs. And then the convention organizers say, oh, well, we'll have so many BIPOC, trans BIPOC speakers next time. And we'll make sure to give them all the awards. I don't know. Well, they couldn't do that at the Hugos, but you could just do a bunch of stuff. And so then like the threat of having someone call Twitter on your ass filter through to every part of American society. You can no longer call Twitter on people. Yeah. You can call Blue Sky on people, but no one gives a fuck. Like they're dragging your ass on Blue Sky is the least scary sentence in America. I hope they drag my ass on Blue Sky all day, every day, all day, every day. They cannot do anything to me. It is like Nerf being shot. It's like a whole bunch of like shrieking people firing Nerf guns at me. It's like you cannot do anything, and then it's like you're firing Nerf guns at a tank. And so the point is that cancel culture, broad-based grassroots cancel culture is done because companies took a while to learn, but they eventually learned no one's going to riot. The only bad thing that could happen to you is that conservatives will actually occasionally organize a real boycott of you, but progressives never will. The libs will never actually boycott you. They'll, because the libs are too busy trying to boycott each other. And then look at Blue Sky. Like Will Stansel's getting the business on Blue Sky. Will Stansel's the guy they all hate. Like you're not in danger. If you're normie, you have Will Stansel standing between you. It's like that thing where like the guy's like covering you from all the arrows and stuff like that. That's Will Stansel.
Jesse Signal too, right?
Jesse Signal, yeah. Or like whoever, it's these guys. If I were on Blue Sky, I'd be protecting you because they'd all be trying to cancel. They'd all be screeching at me all day. But I'm not on Blue Sky, so they can't do anything to me. And so like these people are chuds. The people suck. Like Jamel Bowie is a columnist for the New York Times. He wrote this whole long series of tweets about how I'm an antisocial loser. Like antisocial?
Yeah. You're too social to be on Blue Sky. Yeah.
I'm too social to be on Blue Sky. Like we hang out frequently in the real world. Like how antisocial am I? And yet a New York Times politics writer has called me antisocial and insists that I'm a guy who never leaves his room and could never order a pizza on the phone.
That's ridiculous.
Like, what are you talking about? Like, you live in a different world, son. Like,
Yeah. Cool. Well, I want to be mindful. We're at time, but this was a great, wide ranging "We're So Back" episode in terms of analyzing what's going on in China and what's going on domestically. And excited to be back. No, as always, a great conversation. Until next time.
Absolutely. All right. Until next time.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Econ 102. If you like this episode, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, leave us a rating or review, and share it with your friends and family. For more episodes, go to YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify, and follow us on X at Erik Torenberg and at No Opinion. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.